And folks, this morning, it's a little bit of a continuation of what we've been doing. And I want to talk this morning on restoration. Last week, Guy and Cheryl shared a lovely message about, entitled, Loved by God. And listening to it and preparing for today, I just felt again, there's a need to come back to identity and who we are. You see, because a Christian who does not know who they are is going to be ineffective in spreading the gospel. So it's the one area that our enemy is going to constantly fight against. He's going to tell you lies about who you are, because if you don't know who you are, you're not going to be able to tell others about this wonderful God that we serve. I mean, and the restoration that we even looked at last week was again so amazing. Cheryl shared about Solomon, who God named Jedediah. And there's that passage that amazes me that says that Solomon was Uriah's wife was the mother of Solomon. Now Uriah was the one that David had the affair with and had her husband killed. And the heir to the throne of Israel was chosen to be the son of somebody whose husband had been murdered by David. Or married. You got me. You know what I'm trying to say, right? That's profound. That in spite of David's sin, the heir to the throne, who would ultimately be Jesus, was the son of Uriah's wife, and David as the father. It's a profound level of restoration that has taken place in that story. I want to work through 3 parables this morning, and they're all from Luke chapter 15. And if you want to open up with me to Luke chapter 15, I'm not going to read the whole passage. Luke chapter 15 is quite lengthy, but I want to tell the story, and I want to just mark some key scriptures as we go through it. And I want to start with Luke chapter 15, verse 1 to 3. Which says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him, and the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, 'This man receives sinners and eats with them.' So he told them this parable." And the importance of the context is to understand who and why Jesus was talking. See, the Pharisees were a little bit offended, because here's this guy claiming to be the Messiah, claiming to be the Son of God, and surely this Messiah is going to come and speak to us, the Pharisees, because we're the holy ones, we're the ones that are keeping the law. But yet he goes to people that are known as sinners. He goes to the people that they know are not living sinful lives. They would probably know exactly who's been to temple lately. They'll know who is following the Torah and who is not. And here Jesus is with tax collectors, the most hated people. And so when Jesus responds, he's talking in this context. And he starts with the parable of the lost sheep, which quite simply says is that the shepherd realizes there is a sheep missing. So he leaves the 99 sheep in the field, and he goes and searches for the one that's missing. And it says in verse 5, "And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing." Because of the context of this parable, Jesus is clearly talking about those sinners that are around him. And he says it as well. I don't come to heal this. I don't come to speak to the healthy. But he goes to find the lost. And what a beautiful image of Jesus carrying the sheep. You see that Jesus says he will carry the sheep back to the herd. Why? That sheep is tired, hurt, weak. Maybe it hasn't had enough water. But Jesus comes and brings restoration by carrying that sheep on his shoulders. And what a beautiful picture then, that the angels will rejoice when that one sheep comes back to the flock. And I want to ask yourself, folks, this morning, Do you see yourself as a sheep that is worthy to be looked for? Worthy of our great shepherd to come searching for you, to find you, to put you on his shoulders and carry you back to the flock. Do you see yourself as worthy this morning? Because God does. God sees you as worthy this morning. And there's another interesting principle that unfolds here, is that Jesus doesn't go and find the sheep. The shepherd doesn't go and find the sheep and try and heal the sheep where it is so that he can put the nook around the sheep's neck or tie a rope to it and it'll walk its way back. Jesus goes and picks up the weak, wounded sheep, puts it on his shoulders, and the restoration of that sheep happens in the flock. It's an important principle to realize that we don't need to get ourselves restored so that we can belong to the flock once more. Restoration happens here. The second parable that they talk about is the parable of the coin. Just to give you some context again, we're not talking about money as such. A coin was part of an adornment that ladies wore on their head. And she had 10 coins and realizes there's one missing. And so she goes and starts searching for this missing coin. And when she finds that coin, she celebrates. Think of this as her most beautiful piece of jewelry. That finding that one coin would have been a celebration. Now, Nicole has a ring with 3 little diamonds on, and when she was pregnant with our daughter Helen, she must have bumped it on a wall or something, and it cracked and damaged one of the clasps. Now, fortunately, that diamond didn't fall out. So we discovered that it was loose and could get it fixed. But I tell you what, X months pregnant or not, we'd have been on our hands and feet walking around looking for that diamond until we found it, if it had gone missing. It was her engagement ring. It's precious. It's more precious than the value. The value is nothing. The preciousness is more. And I see that in this parable. This precious coin is lost. It's incomplete. So I want to ask you again, folks, do you this morning see yourselves as a jewel in God's crown? Do you see yourself as being something so important in His crown that if it was to go missing, He would come looking for it? And when He finds it, once again it says that the angels rejoice. God sees you as beautiful, worthy, a jewel on His crown to be fought and found, to be restored to its rightful place as an adornment in His crown. Do you see yourself as that this morning, folks? Because God does. God sees you as worthy. We go on, and it then speaks about the story of the prodigal son. And there's a slight shift in the narrative for me when I read this. And it's not the only interpretation, but when I read that, I read prodigal son, and I start saying, you know what, this is somebody who was already a son in the house. This is a story about somebody who was maybe already a Christian. But they looked at the world around them, and they were so tempted by what was going on outside that they came and said, listen, I'm off. I want to go and enjoy myself out there. And so off they went. And unlike the other two stories where something was lost, which I see more as reaching those who have never yet believed, this one is also a story of restoration for those that were restored and were in relationship, but has fallen away through time or circumstance. We read in James chapter 4, verse 1 to 4, it says, what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. Now, doesn't that encapsulate human nature? We covet something, so to get it, I'm going to quarrel, fight. I want something, so I'll murder to get it. That is the state of our hearts as humans. And what's happened is this prodigal son has fallen foul of this fact. His passions have fought within him and won, and he decides he's going to go and enjoy the pleasures of life away from the Father. But we know the story. What happens? The money dries up. The joy in what he was doing falls away. The friends that he have disappear. And all of a sudden, he is so poor, so wretched, that the only job he can find is feeding pigs and being jealous of the food that the pigs are eating. I mean, for a Jewish person, and the imagery of this, guys, what that must have meant to them when he said pigs. He's feeding pigs, like pigs were the uncleanest of the unclean. They were detestable for Jews. And here's this man not only feeding the pigs, but desiring the food that's given to the pigs. I don't know that you could express in words something lower in the context of where Jesus was talking. And yet what this young man decides is that the servants in my Father's house, just the servants, not the children, not the sons, the servants in my Father's house have an abundance. So I'm going to go and I'm going to become a servant. And in Luke chapter 15, we pick up from verse 20. It says, "And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate, for my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate." This loving father restores his son as an heir again. What his son has done is forgotten by the father, ignored, as the son is restored. Even in my own life, folks, I've spent so much time living a life as a prodigal. And my identity was not I am son, but rather I am sinner. But folks, that is not what God sees in us. To the husbands that are here with your wives, why don't you look at your wife quickly and tell her, you are the most beautiful woman in the world. And now wives, look back at your husband and say, you are the most handsome man in the world. Now, guys, I want to just tell you one thing. You're all liars because my wife is the most beautiful woman in the world. Nicole always used to say to me, Leon, you're wearing rose-colored glasses. When you say this to me. Part of her restoration process. Leon, you're wearing rose-colored glasses. And I want to tell you this morning, folks, God wears Jesus-tinted glasses when He looks at you. Because when He looks at you, folks, He does not see your sin. He does not see what you've done. But He sees you as Jesus shows you to be, which is pure and holy. That is how God sees you. Look at the story of this father. Did he from a distance say, servants, come and clean him and wash him and give him fresh clothes and then I'll greet him? He ran to his son and embraced and kissed him. Filthy. Smelling. Folks, if he couldn't afford food, he couldn't afford soap either. So imagine this man who's walked now probably a great distance, sweaty, smelly, still covered in the muck from the pigsty, clothes tattered, the last pair of clothes that he still owns probably. And the father runs to greet him. Why? Because he's wearing Jesus-tinted glasses. And all he sees is his son who he loves. And he wants to go and greet him on the road. Doesn't matter how he smells. And you see that he immediately says, put the robe on. Over the clothes. He doesn't wash him first. Put the new robe on. That's the cloak of righteousness that Jesus gives us. Covers our sin. His blood covers our sin. And he says, put a ring on his finger. What does that mean? You are my son once again. You have the right, folks. This is your ring. You have the right to be called my son once more. None of the servant nonsense. You are my son. How do you see yourself this morning, folks? Do you see yourself as worthy of, in spite of the circumstances you're in spite of the sin you may be dealing with, in spite of the restoration you may still need, do you see yourself as God sees you this morning? Beautiful, holy, lovable. Because that's how God sees you. After that embrace, after that immediate kiss and embracing, the restoration starts. And folks, there's also something important to understand, is that step one in any process of restoration is not the restoration. Step one of a journey of restoration is merely to say, God, here I am. Help me. You don't need to go and try and get yourself perfect. The son didn't need to go and wash himself, beg and borrow and steal to get a good-ish pair of clothes on, so that when he arrived at his father, he smelt of perfume and looked pretty. That's not restoration. That's covering up. You don't need to cover up. Do you think for a moment God does not see what you're doing? Do you think for a moment any one of us can hide any one action from God? Not a chance. The reality we have to face up to in restoration is sometimes the consequences of where we were are going to have lifelong impact on us going forward. There's a reality of the world that we live in that certain actions have consequences. And sometimes you're going to need to deal with those consequences for the rest of your life. But that doesn't change your identity. It doesn't change the fact that God loves you. I played rugby very roughly as a kid. I banged my knee quite badly. I've already had one operation. I'm probably going to have a knee replacement in a few years' time. There's a consequence to my action. Do you see that? Does that change how God sees me? Does that change how God uses me? No. And the same principle applies in our sin, in what we're doing. But do you see yourself, folks? And I want you to see yourself as a son or a daughter who God loves. I want you to see yourself as beloved, beautiful, pure, holy, righteous, worthy, made in God's image. Because that, folks, is who God sees through His Jesus-tinted glasses. A few weeks ago, a guy spoke about the restoration of Peter. If you were there or remember the story, you'll know that Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And then Jesus asked Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" But there are a couple of other elements to this story that always blow me away. And it's the care that Jesus took in this process of restoration. You know, Jesus had big plans for Peter. And he even said to him at one stage, Peter, you are the rock on which I will build my church. That's pretty big words. Like Peter was the first church leader. That's something quite significant. And yet, when we meet Peter, back in Luke chapter 5, verse 8, Jesus was on the shore busy preaching, and Peter, amongst a few other fishermen, were out on the Sea of Galilee, caught nothing all night. And so Jesus says, listen, I want to stand in your boat to preach. So he gets on the boat and he's preaching. And then he says to them, go out a little further and let's cast the net. And they're like, dude, we've been out all night. We haven't caught anything. But, okay, if you say so, we'll go. So off they go, cast their nets. And you know the story? They catch a huge amount of fish. And Peter's response in Luke chapter 5 verse 8 is when Simon Peter saw it, the miracle, he got down on the feet of Jesus and said, go away from me, Lord, because I am a sinful man. Now we don't know the sin that Peter was in. We've just started rewatching some of the Chosen series in season 1 again, and we meet Peter as this fairly naughty chap. Now, we don't know the sin that he was in, but how much sin must he have been in that when he meets Jesus, he says, go away from me, I'm sinful. And what is Jesus' response? Follow me. Not, okay, go away. And so much so that he's even got a call on Peter's life, way before this moment even happened. Jesus has a call for his life. So if Peter was a sinful man, and God accepted him, why do we think God can't accept me? Anyway, just to go on to the story of this restoration again, looking at where Peter came from. In John chapter 18, it deals with Peter's denial of Jesus. And in verse 18, it places Peter amongst a bunch of people waiting in a courtyard. And it says specifically, now the servants and officers had made a charcoal fire because it was cold. And they were standing and warming themselves. Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself. Now that verse comes just after his first denial. And a little later in John chapter 18, it deals with his other two denials. Then in John chapter 21, after the crucifixion, and after the resurrection, and after Jesus had even appeared a couple of times to the disciples, what are the disciples doing? They're out on the Sea of Galilee fishing. And I sometimes wonder, what was going through their heads? But the reality is that they were just falling back into what they knew. They were a bit confused now about what was going on. Jesus is dead, now he's risen. What are we going to do? Okay, let's go fishing. Right, so the logic doesn't track for me, but maybe it worked better for them. It's like the 3 years are a distant memory already. And they're dealing with this. Anyway, Jesus is standing on the shore and he calls out to them. Hey, have you caught anything? They don't recognize him. No, we haven't caught anything. He says, okay, well, throw your nets on the other side of the boat. They didn't recognize him still. Surely at this point there's some memory of what was happening earlier. They don't twig. Then they start catching a huge amount of fish. And John, the disciple, eventually says, it's the Lord. They suddenly recognize him. And Peter, this impulsive dude, what does he do? He jumps in the water and he swims to shore. Sorry about the fish, and you guys deal with that. I'm coming to shore to meet Jesus. And it says in John chapter 21 verse 9, when they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it and bread. And then we know the story. Jesus asks Peter 3 times, do you love me? But that's not the extent of the detail that Jesus went to. He was sure to create a circumstance that reminded Peter of when he was called. You remember, Peter, the last time you caught fish like this? What happened? You just had a huge catch. And that's when I called you and said, come and follow me. Peter, you see this charcoal fire. When last were you standing around a charcoal fire? which was the day you denied me. Peter, I'm asking you 3 times, do you love me? Why? Because 3 times you said you don't know me. You see, there was a journey of restoration that Jesus was taking Peter on, preparing him, unraveling him, as we said 2 weeks ago, getting him ready for the task that God had put out before him. Maybe this morning, you're already on a journey of restoration. Maybe it started last week or 2 weeks ago as we've been touching on this subject of identity. Maybe this morning you still need to say, God, here I am. Help me. I don't know where you are in your journey right now, but I want to tell you, folks, that Jesus is looking at you. God is looking at you through His Jesus-tinted glasses this morning. You do not have to have shame about what you've done, but rather hold on to the identity that God has put on you through the blood of Jesus Christ. Can I ask us all just to close our eyes for a moment? And I just want to also give an opportunity now. If there is anybody here this morning that is still at the place of, I'm still lost. I've never accepted Jesus as my Savior. And I want to read this passage to you. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14 to 16. As we have our eyes closed. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. Folks, Jesus came to earth so that He could know your weakness. Not just know about it, but know your weakness. And He was in every respect being tempted as we are, yet He was without sin. What is this saying? Guys, Jesus is the only one who can ever claim, I am without sin. Let us then, with confidence, draw near to the throne of grace. His coming to earth, His dying, His knowing our weaknesses, His knowing our temptation means that we can come with confidence to the throne of grace. We don't have to step up sheepishly saying, oh Lord, what have I done? We can come with confidence and say, Lord, I need you. And if you've never done that before this morning, I want to ask you, why don't you raise your hand and say, I need to say, Jesus, I need you this morning. Is there anybody who for the first time wants to make a commitment to follow Jesus? Give a couple of moments if you want to raise your hand. Then I want to go on and say to those folks who are maybe still on a road of restoration or need to start on a road of restoration. We're going to sing a song just as part of ministry this morning. It's Waymaker. And in the song, I want to give you the opportunity to just listen to those words. We want to sing it over you as a prayer. God is the Waymaker. He's made the way, folks, for us to be restored. And that's through Jesus Christ. And this morning, wherever you are in your journey, I want to just know and make sure, folks, that as you leave this place this morning, go knowing that Jesus is looking at you. God is looking at you through His Jesus-tinted glasses. He's not asking you to be perfect. We're not asking you folks to go and sort stuff out before you can come to the church and be restored. We're saying right now where you are, come before God and say, I need you. Help me. Here I am. God is the Waymaker. Let us worship Him as we sing this song.